play against Daniel. Wow, that's a name. I don't even want to. We're going to get the pronunciation of that name.
Memon?
Is that Daniel? Do you think that's Daniel?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, just no E. It's
but
an A instead.
I don't want to spec.
Yeah.
Find out.
I want first and last name pronunciation because I don't want to butcher this. Daniel like lemon, but with an M.
All right, Daniel Memon.
Daniel Memon. Daniel Memon. I can do this with Eldrazi Tron against Harlan Fear playing Grixis Urza. There you go. Daniel Memon. We're underway. It's Nurse's mine to get the day started.
So a couple things going on with Harlan's deck here. There's a sort of a snow sub-theme going on.
There is.
But the core of the deck is Urza along the Thopter Sword combo. Urza does a ton of stuff. A lot of presence on the battlefield, a lot of mana, and the ability to dig for extra cards. And you sort of can bury your opponent with just a bunch of leftovers over a long game. If you have Urza alongside the Thopter Sword combo, that is infinite. Because
That's correct.
The Thopter can be tapped for the 1 mana you need to move the equipment around, and so there you go.
Now this looks like it might be a problem. Chalice of the Void on 1 against a deck that does have, of course, 1 mana spells and all that jazz. There's another Urza's Tower, so Tron is not complete here for Daniel Memon. There's a Walking Ballista. And that will resolve. And we're going to head back over to Harlan, who's played 2 Mishra's Baubles and a Chromatic Star. He's going to check the top card of his deck with a fetch land on the battlefield so he can control what he draws. He's drawn a copy of Urza. Now he has a copy of Goblin Engineer.
Because he has War of Invention in his deck and other artifact considerations like Urza, Harlan's not just firing off these Mishra's Baubles as soon as he can. And I think part of the reason that he wants to do a sacrifice now is because he's facing Chalice of the Void, he's a lot more sensitive to drawing 1 mana cards. He wants to avoid that. So he can bobble himself in that spot, see if there's a 1 on top, and then shuffle his deck if he doesn't like the draw.
Another Walking Ballista there for Daniel. And now Harlan's going to sacrifice a couple of fetch lands. You mentioned that snow sub-theme. That'll be a snow-covered island. And this will be a snow-covered island. There's also a snow-covered swamp hiding out in there. Now we're going to see Whir of Invention for 2. I believe this is going to get Thopter Foundry. It is.
And so I think Harlan here has a path to a fast combo by his standards. Urza already rolled up, along with the Goblin that can then entomb a Sword of the Meek, and then you're good.
There's a Mox. Here's an Urza. He's going to use the Mox and the Bauble to cast Goblin Engineer. There's your sword. That's your infinite life, infinite tokens. Yep. That was easy. He sure did make it look easy.
I thought he needed another turn. I didn't know that he had it all ready to go right now.
And Daniel says, we're all done.
And you can see that the Bauble in this deck is kind of an interesting piece because it isn't just for cycling and filling up the graveyard. There are considerations with artifacts. And sometimes Harlan sits there for a little while and just waits to set up a turn like the one we just saw.
This deck looks a little bit confusing on the surface, but you got to remember that Harlan and Brian Colville both top-aided with this deck in Pittsburgh when we were there a couple of weeks ago. So we are going to take a look here at the sideboards, and we'll get these swapped around in just a moment as we have the Eldrazi Tron one on the right and the Grixis Urza one on the left. But we can work through this, you think?
Yeah,
we can do it? All right. For Daniel Memon, 4 Land on the Void, 2 Tormod's Crypts, 2 Spatial Contortions, a Mystic Forge, a Walking Ballista, a Grafdigger's Cage, Liquid Metal Coating, and a Mycosynth Lattice. What do we like and why?
So it may not look that way on the surface because what Harlan did was a lot about presence on the battlefield, but Land on the Void is an issue for his deck. It cuts off both the Goblin and the Thopter Sword combo. So I think the Leyline of the Void should come in. I could also be talked into bringing in 1 copy of the Tormod's Crypt because Daniel has 2 in the sideboard, and that way you have 1 to naturally draw and 1 to go get as a Karn target should that come up.
Okay. That's for Harlan Fear. I have his deck list in front of me in our beautiful tablets that decrease our productivity. 4 Leyline of the Void, 2 Assassin's Trophy, 2 Fatal Push, a Nature's Claim, 2 Weather the Storm, a Tezzeret Agent of Bolas, a Duress, and 2 copies of Thoughtseize.
So I think, speaking to Harlan after his match yesterday, he has a lot of respect for Leyline of the Void as a problem card for his deck. So I think you're going to see the Assassin's Trophy and maybe some of the discard spells as well. You could also talk me into maybe a couple copies of Fatal Push in this matchup, though the Eldrazi Tron deck goes so big that maybe you want to leave those back.
I mean, Karn didn't show up that game. Chalice did. But Chalice was pretty beatable.
Yeah,
Didn't really mess things up too much.
Chalice is not a lock, and Harlan has a lot of agency over his draw steps. He can cycle, he can move things through his graveyard and back onto the battlefield with Goblin Engineer. So some of his draws, it's going to be annoying for the opponent to have Chalice, but he's rarely going to be fully locked out of the game by a Chalice for 1 or a Chalice for 0.
Yeah, as we just saw right there.
Right.
I do agree. I think annoying is a really good word to use.
Yeah, it's not nothing, but if it is not being backed up with any pressure, with enough time, Harlan can work through that stuff pretty easily.
Okay. Well, it was a pretty straightforward first game, I would say. But Urza, it can't be underestimated. I mean, this is a card that, you've got 4 copies of Goblin Engineer, and it's not that hard to just kind of put together the combos we just saw there in combination with Word of Invention, which is oddly only playing 2 copies of.
Right. It's a lot of mana.
That's true.
And the Goblin covers a lot of your searching needs anyway, so.
Let's very quickly talk about the StarCityGames.com weekly sale as these players do shuffle up and get ready here for game number 2, where you can save up to 33% off of select mythic rares through Monday. The Johnny Strength of the Pride, Karn Liberated, Nicol Bolas, Dragon God, and the Mimeoplasm are all available at go.starcitygames.com/sale. And, best of all, new sale coming early Monday morning at 11 a.m. East Coast time.
We just run it right back. We run it right back. New sale, new cards.
All the sales. You know what? First show I've done with you for a little while where you haven't brought any cards to the booth.
Yeah, I've been trying to look around the dealer booth for some alpha garbage. My favorite thing to buy.
Alpha garbage.
Last time I was here, I bought an Iron Claw Orcs off of Hot Sauce Games.
I remember that.
It's a little barren out there. I'm gonna have to dig a little bit deeper, but there's still plenty of time left for me to go browsing.
We got a whole day.
Little window shopping.
That's right. Harlan Fear is the player we're going to take a moment to learn about, number 12 on our Player of the Year leaderboard here on the SCG Tour. He is 24 years old, member of Team Nova, and a Charlottesville, Virginia native. Last year he played 10 opens, no top 8s unfortunately for him, but this year things are doing much better. He's got 9 open top 8s all time with 2 open wins, 1 in Richmond and 1 in Louisville. I remember because I was there for both. Donates his hair after it reaches a certain length and loves himself some Grixis Urza right now, does Harlan Fear. Him and Brian Colville having a lot of success with that deck on the SCG Tour. And I don't mind watching it in action. Don't mind watching it. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's showing, I think, sort of the depth of Modern Horizons as a set. Like I've said, that it's easy to focus on the top billing of Hogak and the associated enablers. Certainly the Horizon lands have had no difficulty slotting into decks, but I would describe this as a kind of an entirely new archetype bound together by Modern Horizons between Urza, Goblin Engineer, the Snow Enablers, all that stuff is giving new breath to the Thopter Sword engine.
No Dead of Winter in his sideboard anymore. I've seen that card in Harlan 75 a time or two. He's got Arkham's Astrolabe, though, which, of course, with Snow and Whir and all that stuff makes a lot of sense. So we're underway here in Game 2. It's an Expedition map to get things started off here for Daniel Memon. Chromatic Star, Mox Opal, Mishra's Bauble for Harlan Fear. So he'll get some artifacts out of his hand right away. That'll be a waste. An Expedition map ready to be cracked here at a moment's notice. Harlan does have the combo in his hand already. He's got Sword of the Meek and Thopter Foundry. And he will deploy the sword. Expedition map is going to get cracked. We'll get a temple, not a Tron piece.
Maybe signaling a Thought-Knot Seer here on the third turn?
Perhaps. Harlan's hand right now is just 2 lands and then Sword of the Meek. The ability, of course, to draw a couple additional cards with Mishra's Bauble and Chromatic Star. And we'll see what Memon wants to do on his third turn of the game here in just a moment. Both these players checking in at 8-1. Off to great starts. Not a lot of players in day number 2 of competition. And we got 6 rounds to get through today before we make our cut to our top 8. Back to Memon we will go. There's your Temple. And there's your Thought-Knot Seer. And there goes the Sword. Polluted Delta and Scalding Tarn are all that's left in the hand at this moment. Fear is going to sacrifice Chromatic Star to the Thopter Foundry. That will allow him to draw a card and make a Thopter. Nick Miller in the house.
So Harlan, not a whole lot going on right now, but drawing very heavy.
Bobble will show Harlan the top card of Daniel's deck. Harlan will draw from the Bobble. He'll draw for his turn. I think he picked up a copy of Astrolabe, so that'll allow him to draw another card. And he's found Goblin Engineer.
So from here, if Harlan is looking to sort of just grind cards, if you think the Engineer is going to stay on the battlefield for a while, something you can do is search up an Ichor Wellspring. Between that and another cantripping artifact like the Astrolabe, you can just kind of sit around and draw cards. Especially because he has a setup here where if he finds Urza, it gets good really fast. Looks like he's just reestablishing the Thopter Sword combo, however.
And he'll get in for a 1 with that Nick Miller Thopter token as well. So he's got Sword of the Meek in the graveyard. He's got Thopter Foundry on the battlefield. He actually has access to a mana with Mox Opal as well to sacrifice some sort of artifact and get that sword back. Now, it's got to be a non-token artifact. He can't sacrifice that Thopter token to get it back, but he can sacrifice the Astrolabe if he'd like. Yeah,
Harlan has a lot of, sort of dinky, replaceable cantripping artifacts, a lot of stuff to sacrifice.
Now, do keep in mind that that Expedition map is not on the battlefield. Thought-Knot Seer and those lands are. And another land has joined the fray there in Cavernous Souls, most likely naming Eldrazi. That's another Thought-Knot Seer. The hand is all lands.
And I think Memon is in some very serious trouble now.
Well, Urza's game over, as we know. As here comes Thought-Knot Seer. Harlan's going to take that forward. He's got plenty of life to work with and the ability to gain more life as he'll sacrifice the Astrolabe. Get back the Sword, make a Thopter. And so for every mana that he has, he gets to gain life and make a 1/1.
And produce chump blockers. So racing from Memon's side through this is nearly impossible.
Galvanic Blast is a pretty nice draw. He's got Metalcraft, so he can just kill a Thought-Knot Seer. This will allow him to draw a card from killing a Thought-Knot Seer. Astrolabe is the draw, which allows him to draw another card if he elects to. Interesting here in that I don't think that Harlan actually wants to do that, because if he does draw Urza, he wouldn't be able to play it.
And then it's exposed to a Thought-Knot Seer. I think Urza is so powerful for Harlan right now that it's worth giving up a little bit of efficiency to try to protect it at all costs. And if it's in the top 2 cards of the deck, that's going to be game over just as easily as he can afford to wait.
Here comes Reality Smasher for Daniel. This one does have Trample, so it makes blocking a little bit more difficult here for Harlan. But Harlan does have the ability to just, again, make a lot of Thopters, chump block the copy of Thought-Knot Seer, and kind of undo a lot of the work that Reality Smasher has done.
He can do better than a chump block here if he wants to. He can try to push on either the Smasher or the Thought-Knot Seer.
Well, okay, that's fair. It's a 2/3. One of those Thopters is that's wearing the Sword, and then block with all those other tokens. So a gang block will get the job done there on the Reality Smasher.
I mean, for this position, Harlan doesn't even need to establish an infinite combo. Memon's not going to be able to race this with just random creatures on the ground.
Thopter Foundry the draw there for Harlan. He'll sacrifice the Polluted Delta, going to get a land out of his deck, pardon me, before probably casting this Astrolabe. You would think for a deck that has Karn the Great Creator, this would be a pretty bad matchup for Harlan, but it seems as though if they don't draw Karn, you are doing pretty well, and you have answers to Karn as well.
Yeah.
And what's notable here is that Harlan doesn't actually have to cast the Astrolabe as he passed the turn back. He can just have this swath of mana up and say, I'm going to make 6 creatures. I'm going to make 7 creatures. However much mana I have, I'm just going to make that many Thopters.
He'll also keep in mind that he can swap the sword out with the Goblin Engineer for anything in the graveyard too.
Also true.
So in terms of turning over cards, it's trivial.
No. And Daniel Memon knows that he cannot get himself out of this situation. He's going to concede the game. So Harlan Fear is going to win this game and match here over Daniel Memon, 2-0. Grixis Urza very quickly taking care of Eldrazi Tron early this morning here in beautiful Columbus, Ohio.